Olá, muito bem-vindos ao Sustent Talks, nessa primeira live que nós fazemos aqui para tratar do tema de recuperação do estado do Rio Grande do Sul, para tratar sobre resiliência climática. O objetivo aqui no Sustent Talks, como muitos de vocês já conhecem no nosso canal, é tratar sobre sustentabilidade, tratar sobre investimentos verdes, sobre oportunidades verdes, e toda essa agenda está profundamente conectada com a agenda de adaptação e de resiliência climática. Em razão do networking importante que nós temos aqui no Sustent Talks, uma das conversas que nós internemos muito importante nesse momento é para tratar sobre a reconstrução do estado do Rio Grande do Sul. O evento climático foi sem precedentes, como todos nós sabemos, e como nossa missão aqui, nós entendemos por bem chamar especialistas que possam falar sobre infraestrutura resiliente e, mais que isso, que possam nos contar sobre a experiência na recuperação de regiões em relação a outros desastres climáticos que tenham acontecido no mundo. E não necessariamente é para que a gente possa importar soluções. O Brasil é muito único, a catástrofe que aconteceu tem suas particularidades, mas é para que a gente possa aprender com os erros e os acertos desses lugares. Então, a gente pretende uma conversa muito livre aqui e antes de ir para ela, quero deixar aqui o agradecimento a todos aqueles que fizeram possível nós estarmos aqui hoje nessa live com vocês. Existem várias pessoas que estão por trás desse projeto, são os nossos tradutores, né? Nós temos hoje aqui na descrição dessa live, existem dois links, um link que é o link original, essa live vai ser transmitida em inglês, e também o segundo link com a tradução simultânea. Então, agradecimento aos tradutores que estão aqui nos ajudando com esse trabalho, também com o nosso designer, o Akira Sato, com todo o pessoal da produção do Sustent Talks, com a Gabriela, que é a nossa designer das nossas mídias sociais, enfim, são tantas pessoas envolvidas, quero deixar o agradecimento aqui a elas. E passar, então, agora para os nossos convidados. Switching into English.
Mhm.
So, Marcel Van Hatten and David Dodd, thank you so much for being here in Sustain Talks. I think that this is the main subject now here in Brazil, and it's very important to have you two here, two of the people that I really respect and that are really important to think more about this situation and about recovery. I'm going to read very briefly the CV of both of you so people can understand with who we are talking to, since we have an international audience and also people from Brazil that are listening to us. So David Dodd, he's founder and CEO of ISRC, International Sustainable Resilience Center, that is one of the most important centers in the world about resilience. He's a global expert on economic resilience, disaster recovery, and climate adaptation finance. He has over 25 years as an economic development executive and consultant. He strongly advocates for public-private partnerships, for PPPs. This is our bond starts here, right, David? In disaster recovery and resilience. So this is one of the things that we are going to talk a lot here, right? How PPPs can be key, can play a key role on these recovery measures. He had a significant role in disaster recovery in the following events: Hurricane Katrina, initiatives in Mexico, Japan, and Australia. So you've been also in Fukushima in 2011, right? He's co-founder of WAP, of the World Association of Public-Private Partnerships. So we share our bond also in WAP, and he's contributor to the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, UNECE. Also, we've been together a few weeks ago in the UNECE event. Well, on the other side, we have Marcel Van Hatten. So Marcel is a federal congressman. He's representing the state of Rio Grande do Sul. That is the state where all of the floods that we're talking about here happened. He also holds, as an academic, as a highly graduated academic, he holds a master's degree in communication, journalism, and related programs from Aarhus University, with specialization in media and politics at the University of Amsterdam. He earned a Master's of Science degree in political science, specializing in comparative politics from Universiteit Leiden. I'm sorry if I said it in a wrong way. Please correct me, Marcel. And he holds a specialist degree in law, economics, and constitutional democracy from Universidade Federal do Rio Grande do Sul. Well, Marcel is a gaúcho. He's gaúcho, as we say. He's from not only a representative from the state, but he was born on the state where everything happened. So I would like to welcome you two to Sustain Talks, remembering that this is a conversation. So we are here to exchange experiences, and it's so rich that the two of you are here. Thank you. Marcel, if you want to say something, and after that, David, just
Of
to
course,
start.
of course. Let me start. So we have our special guest speaking next. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you so much, Natasha, for inviting me. We are now facing a very big challenge in Brazil, especially in my state, Rio Grande do Sul. Um, I can show later maybe some pictures. I sent a PowerPoint presentation so people can have a better look at it. But just to give you a glimpse, we have now, out of a little bit over 11 million inhabitants, over 580,000, I'll say it again, 580,000 people out of their homes. Out of the 497 municipalities to this day, over 400 are either in a calamity or in an emergency situation. And this is huge. The last event of this sort we had in our state was in the year 1941, and it was not as big as this one, although it was big as well, and had also many casualties then. But I'm, even though very sad at this moment, of course, I'm happy to be here in your company because you are excellent in everything you do, and I'm sure that this will also mean that we will have some good initiatives out of this live conversation, and also from the audience that is watching us. And I'm also happy to be in the presence here, even though online, of Mr. David Dodd, because I'm sure he has a lot to tell us. I have a lot of questions, not so many answers. We're not experienced with that. This is something that, we had some floods in the past, but as I told you, it took almost or more than 80 years for such a big event to happen again. We have to learn by doing right now, and international experience is key. And when we think about international experience, we think, of course, about the United States, we think about Japan, we also think about the Netherlands. My father is Dutch, so I have also Dutch citizenship. I lived in the Netherlands, and I talked already with many people that are specialists in this field before what happened in Rio Grande do Sul, especially because the Netherlands also had a flood in the 1950s, 1953, if I'm not mistaken, with over 2,000 casualties, and it also, made the Netherlands become what
Famous.
they are today, right? Yeah, and now we have this same situation again in our state, Rio Grande do Sul, and with the help of good people, I'm sure that we will overcome it. So thank you so much, and I'm here to watch, to learn a lot, and if to some extent help, I will also do my best here. Thank you.
Marcel, I forgot to mention that you're now the presidency. You're the president of the External Commission,
Yeah.
uh, right? That's right. You're already the president of the commission who's going to accompany the floods, the measures for
Yeah,
the floods, right?
it's good you mentioned it so I can, yeah. So what happened in September last year? We had already a big flood. So it was not as big as this one, but was enormous in a specific region of Rio Grande do Sul, the Vale do Taquari, and some other municipalities. Unfortunately, the same region, alongside other regions now, was once more subject to this natural event. However, then we already started working on some issues to recover that region and also to put up some plans for the future, because we know we have to focus on prevention, we have to focus on alert systems, and we have to work on the coordination of efforts when something like this happen. So we created that external commission of the House of Representatives. 31 representatives signed it, and that means that all 31 representatives from my state, Rio Grande do Sul, regardless of political position, ideology, signed it. So we were all 31 of us working together in this commission. I'm the president only because I was the one who proposed it. We have a rapporteur that is on the government side. I'm on the opposition. I'm the president. I'm in the position. The rapporteur is in the government side, which also means that we are together even when it comes, to the actual work of this external commission. So thank you for reminding me, because this is indeed an important fact.
Yeah. So, David, please, your first words. And so, what do we do now, considering your expertise? Please.
Well, it's an honor and a pleasure to be here. I have always admired Brazil. I spent a few lovely days in Sao Paulo at a conference years ago, and I really fell in love with the country and its people, all of you. And it's a special honor to be here, both with you, Marcel, knowing your involvement and status, and of course my dear friend Natasha, who is well known and revered, not only in Brazil, but throughout the public private partnership universe, thanks to her involvement with the World Association. The real answer to that question is that I think you're already starting to assess what happened. That is really the first step in long-term recovery is assessment. And it's important, Natasha, to establish the difference between response and recovery.
Good.
Response is absolutely critical. That is when people's lives are saved, when people avoid catastrophic damage and injury and death. So I take my hat off to responders, and I have always felt that we must work hand in hand. But after the response and after things have started to stabilize, then you have to assess what it happened. How did it happen? What were the factors that led to this happening? And how can we, as we recover, build in resilience? That's a fact we did not learn in Hurricane Katrina. But we did learn in the second catastrophe that I'll discuss, which is much like the one you are now facing, in that you had two major floods within 8 months. We had two major floods within 6 months. Two, as we say, 1,000-year floods. That means there's a 0.001% chance of that happening in any given year. And so I think there are a lot of things that we did in that recovery that I can share with you that may help you as you recover.
So, David, one thing that you told me a few weeks ago that really made me really worried was not only the cost, the recovery cost for the infrastructure, for everything, and the long-term investment that is needed, but the economic cost of it. So you told me that Hurricane Katrina, even though it was a super expensive budget for recovering the infrastructure and everything, it's not on the same standard in an economic point of view. The state is not in the same standard. So this really led me to talk with you about it. So because it's not only a matter of putting everything up again, but people, they migrate after a catastrophe. And we need people to come back, to decide to come back in order to get back to work, to industry, the factories, everything that is related to economy. People will have to be in the cities. They need to go back to Rio Grande do Sul. They need to want to be back in order to everything to be fully recovered. So how do you deal with that?
Well, let me just expand on what I told you initially. There are direct damages, and then there are economic impacts. And the fact is that just on the economic side, and we'll get to the social and societal side, but on the economic side, business interruption, the inability of businesses to continue to do business, the inability of suppliers to get their goods to the businesses that sell those, the inability of manufacturers to get the supplies that they need, that is more costly than the actual physical damage. When these estimates come out that the damages worldwide are about $350 billion a year, the United Nations Disaster Risk Reduction Office and my own firm, my own nonprofit, have said that 2 to 3 times that is really the economic negative impact. So that's the economic side. Then there's the social and societal side, and you hit right upon it, Natasha. After Hurricane Katrina, 200,000 people were put on buses and taken elsewhere. And a lot of those people never came back. When people tell me how long, or ask me how long did it take New Orleans to recover from Hurricane Katrina, which was 19 years ago in 2 months, it'll be 19 years ago, I say we're still recovering because we are. And those things have to be recognized. And so the tearing of the social fabric, the displacement of people, and the impacts of that are also can also be valued in an economic way. You can't put a value on human life. There's no way to put a value on. But what you can put a value on is, as far as damage, is the social and societal damage. And minimizing the economic damage, minimizing the economic negative impacts, and minimizing the social and societal impacts, all of those things should go into a resilient recovery.
Marcel, do we have now informations or any kind of strategy related to that, to this long-term strategy, or not yet? We're still thinking about the moment of the crisis right now.
Yeah, well, can you put the presentation on the screen? Is it
Yes.
possible?
Can
Should
you
we
help?
start with the presentation?
Yes.
It's a very, I mean, it's
Você
I'm
tem
not going
apresentação, por
through the
favor?
whole thing, but at least to get a
I'll do
picture.
it just now. It's
Okay,
important.
yeah. So it is a presentation from May 5th. Okay, so it's already 2 weeks ago. Uh, it's been worse after that, but that's the one that I could find very fast here. Um,
While they're putting that up, a couple of points
yeah, go ahead.
to your point. New Orleans was underwater. Parts of New Orleans were underwater for 2 weeks to 3 weeks. The Louisiana floods did not recede for 2 to 3 weeks. Generally, the type of long-term recovery that I'm talking about starts maybe a month, usually 2 to 3 months after the event, because you have to have stabilization. That's what you're going through right now, Marcel, and I totally understand that. I've been there.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and the truth is, we're still working on, having those people who are out of their homes. We were talking about 580,000 people. Of course, out of these 580,000, 80,000 don't have anywhere to go. So they are now in gymnasiums, they are now in churches, they are being in they are in shelters publicly provided for. These people are one group of people that we have to take care of. and it's very urgent because these people need everything, basically everything. They need clothes because they left their homes with the clothes in that they were wearing. Some of them, even those clothes are not suitable anymore because you can imagine they just left their house uh, on boats on the water. They lack hygiene products. They lack mattresses to sleep on. They lack, and we're facing now cold in our region. So
Yeah.
we're from 45 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit now in my state. It's very pretty cold.
Uma
No heating
apresentação, Gui.
system in
Ele
this
tá esperando
place.
para falar.
So this is one thing. The second thing is the other 500,000 people. They are maybe in a better condition. Normally, you would think so because they are at relatives' houses, they are at friends' houses, but there's not everybody can stay for too long in a place that is not theirs. And also those people who are receiving these uh, people, they also get tired at some point, or they don't have the money to provide for because they need also to provide for everything else that these
Sure.
people need, especially like food, right? So we are now still in this phase, but there we already are seeing some efforts coming from people from outside the state of Rio Grande do Sul. I've been seeing many advertisements of businessmen saying, if you want a job, if you want a house, come to Santa Catarina, come to Paraná. Even in Minas Gerais, I've seen advertisements in that direction, like people willing to help. And this is one question I would pose to you, Dot, because you said many people did not go back, right, into New York, Orleans. Is this something we can also expect in Rio Grande do Sul? I mean, an exodus, people going to, start a new life elsewhere and never coming back to Rio Grande do Sul?
That to some extent did happen, but a lot of new people came in. So a lot of the people that left did not come back, but new people came in. And one of the things that I'm proud to say is that New Orleans was a majority African American city, and it is still a majority African American city. Almost 60% of New Orleans is African American. Only 33% of New Orleans is white. The rest are Latino and Asian. It's a very diverse international city. But the point is that the things that brought people to Louisiana, some people came back, fair number came back, and other people came were the things that were not done after the Japan earthquake and tsunami. And my friends in Japan will be the first to tell you that they put an enormous amount into $240 billion into rebuilding the cities that had been destroyed, but they did not put those incentives in and make that economic activity occur that would make people think it's worth the risk for me to come back. So that those two things have to be done hand in hand. And we learned that the hard way through Katrina. But now anytime that we do long-term recovery, we look at what are the things that are going to bring people back, because you can rebuild infrastructure, but you can't rebuild a city without people or a state without people.
Yeah, that's such an important insight and information that comes with your expertise. And it also happened in other places where you worked uh, in catastrophe, like you worked in Fukushima and also in Louisiana floods. It also happened. It was just something that happened in Katrina, because I think that most of it comes not only because the lack of infrastructure and buildings and everything that must be rebuilt, but also people are afraid of things happening again. So they don't come back because they are traumatized. There are psychological traumas. People, they don't come back. So how to deal with that? Because Rio Grande do Sul is a very important state, economic state in Brazil from economic perspective. And of course, we're already facing problems regarding agriculture and stuff like this. So how can you have strategies not to people leave, or at least to come back?
Well, and what's really important, there are some key differences between Katrina hitting New Orleans and Katrina itself. Katrina itself did not make landfall in New Orleans. It made landfall about 50 to 60 miles east of New Orleans, which is actually in the neighboring state of Mississippi. What caused the catastrophic damage in New Orleans was the failure of the flood protection system, which were earthen levees around New Orleans that were constructed in the 30s and 40s. New Orleans is like a fishbowl. It is below water. The only way to get water out of New Orleans is to pump it out. And when you have a catastrophic amount of water coming in, it's almost impossible to pump it out without destroying, which is what happened. Many of the pumps were destroyed. So you had a different scenario. Now, and the floods in Louisiana were much like the floods that you were experiencing because they were not in New Orleans. The floods, New Orleans was about the only area in the state that was not flooded. But the other cities north of New Orleans had catastrophic flooding. And what they did is the same thing that you were saying, Marcel, that you're doing. Put these people in shelters, put them in places where they could feel safe until things could be stabilized. And that was a success in the case of the floods in central and north Louisiana. The capital city is almost Baton Rouge, which is 70 miles north of New Orleans, is about almost a million people. So it did not lose a great deal of population, even though it was massively flooded. New Orleans population went from 500,000 to 50,000 after Katrina.
Wow. From 500 to 50,000,
50.
like it's
And the area, the metropolitan area around New Orleans, including New Orleans, was about 1.7 million. It went down by 1.2 million. It went down to about 500,000. So it was a again, yours is catastrophic as well, Marcel. I mean those are horrific numbers. And in the 2016 Louisiana floods, which happened 11 years after Katrina, there were two floods, as same thing that happened to you, two floods within 6 months. And the first one was bad enough in itself. It was mainly in north and central Louisiana, which are not as populous, but there were about as many homes and businesses damaged as were damaged probably in your first flood. Not as bad, but the second flood was catastrophic. It dumped it dumped 3 times as much water in that area of the state of Louisiana as Katrina dumped in the area around New Orleans. So I mean, we're talking about 7.1 trillion gallons of water. I need to convert that to liters,
to
but I think
liters.
it's about 3 to 1. So 21, 20 to 23 trillion liters of water dumped in that area. And the displacement, again, there were about 147,000 homes lost, about 10,000 businesses were affected. Total damages were not as nearly as catastrophic as Katrina. They were about $10 billion, but a lot of that was in flooded homes. So when you look at, okay, what do we need to do? What do we need to do to build back, and not only build back but build back better? And one of the things that we employed was bringing the philanthropic community into the recovery operation, because normally there are public dollars that come from the federal and state agencies. There may be private dollars that come through insurance policies, and I can definitely tell you about the impacts on insurance, Marcel. They're horrific over time. Uh, but the philanthropic community, which estimates are $5 to $6 trillion around the world is in philanthropic organizations that can be accessed, at least all or part can be accessed for disaster recovery. So we
But
definitely
David,
want to bring them in.
when you say philanthropic institutions, you're saying during the recovery moment, or you're saying about during the crisis? Because we're seeing this is on the beautiful side of it. If there is a beautiful side, is the solidarity. People are really into helping the state and helping people. So people are, the hearts are with Rio Grande do Sul. But when you talk about a long-term recovery, this is also a key aspect to look at.
Absolutely. And the answer is both. You have organizations like the Red Cross and in some places around the world, the Red Crescent, that are there right after the disaster, helping with the response and getting stabilized, right? But also, there are many philanthropic organizations that provide grant funding to help in long term recovery, and especially recovery that builds in resilience. And the term resilient recovery is something I hope, and I'll learn the Portuguese translation of that, and I will say that next. It's something that I hope Brazil can really embrace right off the bat because it took the U.S. a long time to embrace that. It was long after Katrina that we embraced the concept of embedding resilience into recovery. And we did that in several different ways after the 2016 Louisiana floods that were not done during Katrina.
There is something
Okay.
else that I would also like to add. It's not only that people are moving to other places and maybe not coming back, but also that the places will change forever,
Mm-hmm.
especially on the margin of the rivers, right? So I've been to some of the cities, and the mayors are already talking of transforming big chunks of land that used to be, home to many houses in parks, and having these houses moving to other areas of the municipality. So this is also something that will reshape completely many cities in my state. And I'm sure this also happened in other places where flooding like this occurred, right?
Oh, absolutely. And particularly Hurricane Harvey in Texas, which happened in 2014. Hurricane Harvey hit Houston, Texas, which is the equivalent of Sao Paulo. Well, it's actually the second largest city now. I'm sorry, the third largest city now in the United States. There's New York, Los Angeles, and now Houston is the third largest, and they were completely inundated uh, with Hurricane Harvey, and that led to drastic changes in the design of the city. And they did that same thing, Marcel. They took entire areas that had been overdeveloped and turned them into parkland. One of the things that's really important to understand about where we are now with climate and disasters is that climate change itself is a part of it, but part of it is exacerbated by unbridled development, by not taking these things into account as development is occurring. Now, I'm an economic development person from many years, right? So I'm not
This is this is important
anti-development.
to explain. It's important. Sorry to interrupt you, David. This is very important to explain what means being an economic developer, what it means, and
Yeah,
the
I
importance of it.
my job until Katrina, from the time I was very young, was to help create an environment where businesses could thrive, investment could occur, jobs could be created, contributing to the wealth of communities and cities. So that is infused into everything that I do because of that background. And my specific issue is economic recovery, although I do absolutely touch on and dwell on social and societal. They're all interrelated. You can't have a healthy economy without a healthy society. So again, in that respect, making sure, and this is getting to your point, Marcel, you're the one that brought this up, and I'm glad you did, is in recovery, let's make it smart. Let's make sure that we don't go back and redevelop areas that are vulnerable without doing something to improve the ability of those to withstand flooding, in this case, disaster. So that is a part and parcel. If you're going to need to rebuild, let's rebuild in a smart way so that we don't encounter this again and again. And I think that is the genesis of why embedding resilience into recovery has been so important. Because I'll tell you guys, in the U.S., dumb and smart, dumb and rich, I guess that's kind of what we used to be because we just rebuild. Something would happen and we just rebuild it and then we rebuild it again. And finally we said, wait a minute, this doesn't make any sense. If we rebuild, let's rebuild in a way that we don't have to rebuild again and again and again. And those of you that are fans of sustainability can recognize that you're much more sustainable. You're going to use less resources. You're going to emit less carbon if you don't have to continually rebuild.
Okay, but David, then okay, this is a very important concept, but how do we get this into practice? I think this is the key of our conversation. So of course, people are expecting things to be rebuilt in a safer way. We can say in a more resilient way, in a way that at least we feel less the consequences of climate disasters. But then, especially when we talk about coordination on the state level and the federal level, and then the private sector, how do we balance all of this?
The people ask me, what's the number one issue with disasters, whether or not they are catastrophic, whether or not that there is a sustained recovery? It's communication. Everyone has to communicate on a constant basis and be willing to work together. This term collaboration is often misunderstood. It doesn't mean everyone hugs each other and agrees. It means that everyone agrees enough to agree to work together to come to a solution. And I see Marcel smiling because that's the genesis of being able to be effective in politics is to be willing to collaborate, right? So that is I'm serious though. That's really the key. And so setting up the recovery, if I can just take 1 minute and tell you the recovery after Katrina was a nightmare because that you had federal agencies. I was working with the state of Louisiana at the time. You had federal agencies that were stumbling over each other and saying things that were contradicting each other. So 4.5 years after that, President Obama issued presidential declaration number 8, presidential directive number 8. That was designed to create a national framework that forced federal agencies to work together after disaster. And many of them wanted to anyway, but they didn't have a mechanism. This created the mechanism. And it has been altogether successful. Anything could be done better, but altogether it's been successful. And I was fortunate to be able to be made aware of that as it was being drafted and worked under that up for over 10 years. And there were 6 recovery support functions and there was infrastructure, there was uh, planning and capacity building, there was economic, there was health and social services, and there was uh, uh, I always forget the 6th one, but there were 6 recovery support functions. That is so important to have a framework. That's all it was, a framework under which you can organize recovery and building resilience.
I'm sorry to put another information in this, but it's very interesting to see how it. I mean, I watched the movie or the series at Apple TV, 5 Days at Memorial Hospital. I don't know if you've watched it. Very
I was
interesting.
there. I was there, Marcel. I was there. I
Really?
wasn't aware that that was happening. No one was, but
Okay.
certainly it was an example of a complete failure, complete.
Yeah. I just
Let's
I
say
just
what is
watched.
that? Let's just say what is that. So
Yes.
what is it? So people
Go
can
ahead, Marcel.
understand.
You can tell them about it.
Well,
Please.
yeah, well, you are the specialist, but very briefly, and then you complete maybe. So 5 days at Memorial Hospital. It's a hospital in New Orleans that was used not only for the patients that were there, of course, but also to shelter people that regularly during this kind of tempests or hurricanes or tornadoes, whatever, would go there, just to shelter for the day, and then the next day would leave. But then they stayed because we had the dikes of the city over flooded, and the hospital was not prepared for it, for an evacuation plan. The machinery that provided for energy was in the first, how do you call it,
The
under
Floor,
the
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 first
first level
floor.
underground,
Yeah,
first underground,
underground. It was in the
right?
basement. Right.
Was in the
A
basement,
basement.
lot of it
right?
was, or on the first floor. Yeah, it all flooded.
So imagine it all flooded. So second day it was already starting to become without energy, without water supply, nothing, and people stayed there for 5 days. And unfortunately, there was a very high number of casualties. About 45 people died, if I'm not mistaken.
Most of the
45.
people that died, most of the people that died, and this is really tragic. Most of the people that died were those that were dependent on those machines,
Yeah,
and the nurses made the decision
terrible.
to allow them to die because they were suffering, immensely, and they were convicted for. I mean, not convicted. They were tried. They were acquitted. They were tried for murder. It was a
Yeah,
horrible, horrible example of being unprepared. So let
yeah,
me tell you the other side to that story. The
sure.
other side of that story is that through a public private philanthropic partnership between the state of Louisiana and the federal government, a private hospital was a nonprofit, but still a private hospital, and a foundation, they built a 137 million dollar emergency facility. That facility is 28 feet above ground. It is has triple redundancy in food, in power, double redundancy in equipment, and has enough food and water to, without any assistance from outside, feed 200, take care of 200 people, feed and give them water, keep their equipment going, keep the power going, uh, for 2 weeks. For 2 weeks. And that was only made possible because of the ingenuity of the people that were looking at what do we need to do so that this never, ever happens again. And they constructed this public private partnership that has been extraordinarily successful.
And who
There's
is
an
in charge?
aspect of
Sorry
this.
about.
No, sorry, Natasha.
No, please keep going, Marcel.
Oh, there's just one other thing I would like to add. Like watching the movie, Katrina was back in 2005, so we have to remember there was no social media at the time. At that time, so people were trying to call other people. There was no information really real time. People didn't know really what happened. Only like some hours later they knew that the whole thing collapsed. So I'm thinking a lot about how social media helped in the first place, a lot this time in Rio Grande do Sul. My cell phone was a sort of a,
A hub for
a hub,
communication.
yeah, for help. People asking for help and people offering help. And I was connecting them. Of course, this is some people connect, some people ask for, some people offer. So social media helped a lot in these situations, but we also are experiencing how authorities, and especially politicians, can't deal with social media that well yet. So I know there's many information out there. There's like fake information or people that over dramatize. That's very hard. We see it in every event. There's always somebody who's very, dramatic about something, and everything is bad and the whole thing will collapse. And we need those leaders that say, please calm down, be patient. We know it's hard, but we have to deal with it. But there's also many signs that are sent via social media that for the guys who are in a position of authority, I mean politicians or firefighters, policemen, they have to get this information and take a look at it, and if it is true, work on it. And this is something that is very difficult at the time, especially when politicians don't like to be opposed. It's in the politician's nature. And when there is some criticism on something they do, even though if it's right or if it's true, it's very easy to say this is fake news, this is untrue, and dismiss something that could be important even to save lives or to get the situation fixed. So this is something that's sorry to bring this here, but it's interesting because this is something that took my attention, because when I looked at the 5 days at Memorial and Katrina, there was no social media, only emails and sometimes cell phones. And now we have, all even this live that we're doing right now that is actually helping us to get more information and faster to get things fixed.
Did you
No,
do
I
anything
couldn't.
like this, David, at the
Oh
moment?
yeah, there's a again a stark comparison. There were cell phones in 2005. We all had Blackberries, if you remember that. But the cell towers were not resilient. The cell towers all collapsed, so there was no communication, and that has been rectified. Thank goodness. But in 2016, it was completely different because of social media. And this was before, this was right before all the disintermediation started, disinformation started, right? In social media. So people were communicating on Facebook, they were communicating on all of those social media channels, and it was a very positive thing. You're exactly right, because that is the most critical thing to preventing catastrophic things from happening in disaster is communication, communication, communication. That is, again, the response and early recovery. That is the absolute most essential element. Period.
David, what can we say for the municipalities as a strategy for them now? Or there is no isolated strategy. We have to think in a coordinated way. Municipalities have to wait for the state, and the state has to wait for the federal government. So, how do we deal with these three stages of strategy? And how can they work together on it on the recovery side? Always emphasizing that we're talking about recovery. Of course, we're talking about the crisis, and there is no way to say that this is not important. Of course, it is, but talking about recovery strategy, long term, how should they act now?
The real secret to that for communities is for them to be willing to come together and work together, because they can leverage their assets, they can leverage their efforts by working together. And sometimes there's a natural tendency for communities that are maybe consider themselves rivals not to do that, but they have to in long-term recovery. They have to do that to be able to, again, work together to achieve the things that together that they cannot achieve individually.
And in a
So
practical way, considering your experience, how did it happen in other disasters, like in the 2016 Louisiana floods? How did they act together? Like, I think that there is an agency, a regulatory agency in the United States for disasters. Isn't there is
the
a
Federal
regulatory
Disaster
agency?
Management
Yeah.
Agency, which does both response and long-term recovery. And under this national framework that I described earlier, we brought several agencies together, and we would bring several communities together at once. And we would
Okay.
say, okay, the second most important thing besides working together is don't come in and say, here's what we're going to do. In fact, in the US, working recovery operations, the different agencies of the federal government cannot be prescriptive. We don't. Our job is not to come in and tell them what to do. Our job is to find out what their issues are, and then try to help them develop strategic actions to address those issues. So you remember the famous author Stephen Covey. He said, "Seek first to understand." And
Yeah.
that is the prescription for success. And in other countries where I've done recovery, always is seek first to understand what their issues are, what they feel are the most important things to them. And some of that's based on their values. But when you bring communities together, it's remarkable how much they find themselves. And I think sometimes it surprises them how much they find themselves in alignment on what they think the most important issues that need to be addressed are for long-term recovery, and especially in embedding resilience in the recovery.
And David, the first day that I met you during an event in Geneva, and you were saying precisely this. So you were telling your experience regarding the cities that during the recovery could set a methodology in listening to people. I think listening is a key point here. Listening to people, listen to communities, and it's not just like listening. Go there and listen to some people. There are methodologies for that, right? And how did the municipalities that really listened to the communities they thrived on recovery, and how it was not the reality on the municipalities that didn't do this way? So could you tell us more about it? So what is it about? Listening
Well,
to the
I
communities.
don't want to name names, as you could
Okay.
imagine, but I will tell you there were two communities in a particular state, was not Louisiana, that were destroyed by a single tornado. And one of those communities had most all of the business district in that community destroyed. The other one had significant damage as well. One of those communities had leadership that opened up to the citizens and said, "What is it? What are the things that are important to you? What are the things that you feel must be addressed? What are the things that are going to help you as individuals, you as neighborhoods, and you as a community be better off and more prepared for the next disaster as we do this recovery?" The other community had leadership that did not do that. And it was astonishing the success of the community that listened to its citizens compared to the community that did not. It
And
was night and day.
when you say success, what do you mean by success?
Success in being able to implement recovery strategies that were impactful, that made an impact on the community. Years later, when other adverse weather events happened, in the case of this area, this state has a lot of adverse weather events, and the one that didn't was not prepared. And it was night and day. And the one that listened to its citizens also was more than willing to collaborate with surrounding communities. The one that didn't collaborate. So they didn't have the advantage of communication and coordination with their neighboring communities, especially when you have that set up beforehand when the disaster occurs. It's infinitely easier for you to reach out and say, "Hey, can you help us?" or "Do you need help?" That is to me at the heart of resilience. That is at the heart of successful recovery.
And this is hard to manage because you're talking about a lot of people. So it's a lot of strategy and a lot of effort because listening to communities, uh, neighborhoods, we're not saying communities, neighborhoods, and so many neighborhoods that were impacted by the disaster. It's quite difficult. But if you're telling us that it was possible, and of course you were doing and learning, uh, well, then maybe there's a way. Marcel, we have your presentation here. You want us
Okay.
to can we put it
Well, yeah,
online?
well, I think it's interesting. I mean,
Okay,
it's been
let's do
said,
it.
but just
Sure,
to take
absolutely.
a look
Let's
at
do it.
It
the
took
We can do it.
We took a while, but we could do it. Let's
Let
do
me
it.
find it here too, so I can follow it on my phone as well.
I think it's gonna.
Okay.
Okay. Pessoal, tá vindo. Okay. 1 second, please.
Yeah. Okay, so this is the biggest climate catastrophe in the state. That's what it says there in the first PPT. You can just pass to the next slide. There were 332
Pode passar.
332 cities. Now it's 340. That's the new number today.
Wow.
And these are only the directly affected, because indirect, it's more than 430. We could say the whole state. September 2023, so was the first event I was telling. So you see the center of the state center to the east. You see there's this red paint right there.
Right.
And now you see in April and May, it's basically the whole state that was affected by the floods and by the effects, not only of floods, but also of land that fell, from, I don't know how to call it, but when it come down from the hills and mountains, right?
Right, right.
So you can pass to the next slide. So this was the number then, 15,000 people in shelters. Now we are 80,000. 80,000 people out of their home. Now we have 500,000. Affected is much more. This was before the events in the metropolitan area that took, such a terrible size. Can go to the next one. So just some pictures. That was 75 people dead in May 5th. Now we're 161. 80 are still missed. Here's the level of the rains. We can pass. We can pass to the next slide. Next slide. Next slide. This is the center of Porto Alegre. So these are also the rivers that have dams. So 12 dams are under pressure. 2 of them, unfortunately, also collapsed. We can go further. The contention system is under stress in the city of Porto Alegre. This was then 110 hospitals. Now we have much more. I don't have the figures. I would update it. I'll send an updated link later so Natasha can put also in the comment section if she wants to. Services, of course, were interrupted. You can go further. So the logistics, bridges that fell, roads that collapsed. We don't have an airport in Porto Alegre, our state capital, anymore. Our airport is underwater. So to come to Brasilia, I have to either fly on military planes or go or travel 2 hours, even 4 hours to get to a regular airport. And
Still
even
today. Still today.
Still today, and for at least
Wow.
maybe 6 months. So
Wow.
there is the airport, paralyzed airport. Impacts on production. That's something else that we were, because just stop a little bit on this one, or here in the industry, doesn't matter. We have the impact on people's lives directly. I mean, people who are living in their houses and are not home anymore. We have the big impact on the public infrastructure. That means roads, hospitals, schools. But we also have a significant impact in the economy. I mean, Porto Alegre, the state capital, has 30% of its businesses in the area that is now underwater. Can you imagine how hard it is now to get it? I mean, I flew over the metropolitan region, and there was one a parking lot that struck me, because there were all trucks there, about 80 to 100 trucks. They were all underwater. Imagine the loss. And And I heard of many that don't have any insurance, which is very different than in the United States. We don't have the culture of insurance in Brazil as it exists in the United States. So and now comes to the pictures itself, but I don't think we have to show them all because we know more or less what we're talking about. So this is something else. I mean, the economy, all these people have to work somewhere, and they are working somewhere already, but we need some help also from the state, because otherwise it's not only the easiest way out but also the better way out for business leaders to end the contracts with these people, because you know that would be the easy or best way out, but of course it's not when we think about how difficult it would be for these people to find another job in this
Right,
situation.
right,
Certainly not in the same region. So we
right.
will need a special effort from the government. It's similar to what happened during the pandemic, to put money in these businesses or giving directly these people money and making a sort of a compromise or with the business leaders not to fire these people. It's very difficult.
We had a
I don't know how it happened in New Orleans, but this is a
No, it
very
was very, very similar. In fact, I've been making this comparison with the 2016 flood, but what you showed me reminded me a lot of Katrina, just total devastation. And after Katrina, the very first thing I ever did in this field was I was the lead consultant putting together a summit. Katrina affected 4 U.S. states: uh, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama. Mississippi and Alabama are to this side of Louisiana, and then Texas, the huge state, to this side. Louisiana was the most affected. But we had a summit in the capital, Washington, D.C., with the 4 affected states and a group of senior level officials from the federal government and from the states. And we developed a paper that was presented to Congress that was the foundation for what they call the Gulf Opportunity Zone Act. And that included substantial tax credits, that included substantial aid, it included substantial training and assistance for employees, all with the intent of rebuilding the economy. And
Where did this money come from, David? It was from the
it
federal.
was from the federal government, yes.
Okay.
So the goal was to create the opportunities to bring people back, to get businesses back up and running, to provide people with training for decent paying jobs in those businesses. It took a long time, and the thing that I have to tell you that I don't want to tell you, Marcel, is that this will take a long time. But I think it's important that everyone knows that just because the news coverage goes away, it does not mean that the recovery is even well underway, because that's what's happened in every major disaster, from Katrina to the Fukushima earthquake and tsunami to the massive earthquake along the U.S. Mexico border, the majority of which was in Baja California. All of those major disasters took a long time to
well.
recover from. But I'm not
This
also not trying to discourage you, okay?
No, no,
Because
no.
progress can be made and things can be even better. New Orleans, I can tell you right now, New Orleans, in most ways, is a better city. Culturally, it still suffers because we did have a somewhat of a shift in the population. We still are majority African American, but in many ways, New Orleans is better off than it was.
Yeah. Yeah, let me I know we're well over an hour now. I think it's supposed to be an hour talk, but so good. I'm sorry if we're abusing your patience here. Um and your expertise, of course. But one
Marcel,
question.
He will be with us more, at least more 2 times. So we have
Oh, great.
plenty of time to talk to
I'm just
him.
getting started, Marcel, my friend.
Yes.
Oh,
I'm just
great.
getting started.
Great. But maybe if this is the last question, but one question I would like to, and maybe in a more optimistic tone, but also in a way to give us some advice. Because what you said last is totally the case. I mean, media attention will go. That's normal. Everywhere is that way. Volunteers are getting scarce now. People came. Donation will come less
Yep.
to the state of Rio Grande do Sul. All of this we know. So how do we make this transition? Because there must be a transition to, a phase when there's less media attention, but still food is necessary, recovery more than ever, housing for people, and economic recovery. So with your experience, how do we proceed now so as to make this transition be better than what you have experienced in other places?
The key to a successful transition, and even the initial transition from response and initial recovery to long-term recovery, the key to that is the active involvement of both public and private sectors at all levels, from small businesses to the major corporations, from local small communities to the federal government, from again from charitable organizations to philanthropic organizations. And that must occur beginning right now, this second. That transition should occur right now. And I'll send you and Natasha some graphics that can show how that works, that were done by FEMA, and they are right, because the transition should be seamless. And we always say that recovery starts when the event happens, and long term recovery starts when response is underway. So if I were to give you something, Marcel, and you already know so much, I'm humbled because you already know so much of this. But if there were one piece of advice I would give you, is do not wait 1 second. That's what I told the Prime Minister of Japan when I handed him the framework for recovery. He said, "What advice would you give me?" I said, "Start right now. Do not wait 1 second."
Oh, in that sense, we're starting to do, I think, good. I'm happy to be here with Natasha, for instance. She's an example of that. We have businessmen already setting up a sort of an NGO with some private funding. We have the governor and the federal government. We know there are political issues there, but still, at least the differences are being set aside to a larger extent than I would maybe expect to happen. And we have many volunteers, top level volunteers, I would say, in the sense that people that have expertise and that want to get involved. I mean, now it's a little bit more a question of how to coordinate this effort to make everybody feel at least comfortable, because there's so much knowledge out there. How do you use this for the good and in an effective way? Because you can imagine how many emails and messages and whatever I get every day about what should we do. And I know that many of them are very interesting ideas, but sometimes they're not truly compatible. So how do we connect them all in a very effective way? I think this is one of the answers we have to give it right now and as soon as possible to make this transition work.
Yeah, this is very important what you're saying, Marcel, because many of the messages that I received when we advertised the live is, how can I help? People want to help. People want to know what they can do in this recovery. Like, people are already helping, but they love the state, they love the city, they love everything about it, but how can they really help now? And in your expertise, what is the answer that then we can send to these people, like how they can they help?
There's an old Paul McCartney song. Someone's knocking at the door, let them in. And the thing is to welcome their ideas, welcome their contributions, welcome their physical assistance, whatever they want to do. The ideas can be assembled and serve as a beginning point for the assessment and what the assessment will uncover. But to me, letting people help, letting people give what they can will spur more and more people to help. And that is how you create the impetus for long-term resilient recovery that will be effective. And that's what you want. That's what you want.
Very good. Thank you.
So we have now like a little bit more than 1 hour of live. So we're coming to the end of this first live. As I said, we will have 2 more lives. And Marcel, you will be more than welcome if you're able to. I know that you're having a lot of work there, but please feel free if you're able. We will be very happy to have you here again. And I would like to go for the final words. And also, David, please let's tell to our audience what are we going to cover in our next live next Tuesday. I believe we will go more into the PPP hole in the recovery of the state, right?
Yeah, I have a great case study on that, and we can talk about that. But I think we should probably start with really digging into this transition. I think that's a critical point that Marcel brought up, and we'll have enough time to talk about both that and integrating PPPs into the resilient recovery process. Absolutely, that would be
Good.
perfect.
Marcel.
Great. Yeah. Thank you once more for the invitation. And I think for next Tuesday we'll have it more developed because we're really passing exactly now this moment when we have to, we have data, we have good guys that set up a very nice map of the state of Rio Grande do Sul with pretty much everything we needed to see when it comes to data. But data is just data if you don't know how to use it. If you don't have the good people who have expertise to make them make sense. So now we're in this period, and I mean, 1 week. It's a lot of time when it comes to such a crisis that we have to assemble all this data and give them or open them to the right people to work together, combine it, and work, everyone in their specific sectors to get an answer together for this situation. So I'm very excited for the next steps, even though it's a tragic situation. But of course, we have also a lot of opportunity out there now to at least build a better and sustainable city and state, so that in the future such events, which will happen again, they can
Yep.
happen, it's just nature, right?
Yep.
Don't damage the cities as much, because we need more prevention. I will repeat that we need a better system of alerts so that people know in advance when this happens, and we need better coordination of efforts also in the salvation period. That is the first one, but not forgetting the recovery period that will always, be a period of pain, of suffering, but has to end in a better city and a better state building. Thank
I
you
said
again.
that I said that we were finishing, but you said about data, and David, he let me know about there is a company in the United States, right, David, that works with David on recovery that has it's amazing what they do, the size of the data that they have there and what they do and their whole on recovery. So David, if you want to say a few words about it, like the
Yeah,
importance of
they're a
data on the
partner.
recovery.
They're a partner of my nonprofit. The name of the company is Statebook International. Calandra Cruikshank is the
Yeah.
CEO and founder, and her mother is Brazilian. So she
Yeah,
feels
true.
very connected to Brazil. And I think that there is a great potential to learn from what Calandra's done in the way of disaster risk and analyzing large amounts of data. And also, my nonprofit, we would love nothing better and be honored to be able to assist in this as it moves forward in partnership with you both. And I think that there is a real it's a tragedy, but out of tragedy can come opportunity. And I think this is an opportunity to set a shining example for the rest of Brazil through your recovery. So I'm honored to be here again. I'm so happy that Marcel said next week. That means he is coming back because you added so much to this conversation, Marcel, and it's an honor to have you. By the way, quickly, we can talk about also the Dutch dialogues. After Katrina, New Orleans reached out to your father's home country, and we had a very, very robust exchange of information, and they taught us so much about dealing with water. So you can pass that to your father and the country of your heritage because it was very meaningful, and we can talk about how that worked as well.
Yeah,
Good.
great, great. Yeah, the Dutch say that God created the world and the Dutch created the Netherlands, right?
Exactly.
They had to
Exactly.
fix them themselves.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
it's a joke, but it has some truth to it, actually a lot, and their
Yes,
expertise is enormous.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Good.
thank you.
Okay, so I'm switching into Portuguese again, just to say obrigada a todos. Obrigada a todos que participaram, que puderam participar aqui da live, que nos assistiram até agora. Nós estamos com todas as perguntas aqui, a gente vai dar continuidade a essas lives, a gente tem mais duas lives nas próximas terças-feiras, no mesmo horário, às 8 horas. Mande seus comentários, os temas que você entende importante serem abordados, seja no Instagram do Sustentalk, seja no Instagram meu profissional, Natasha Vestmit, a gente está olhando tudo por lá, para poder fazer com que essas lives sejam efetivamente educativas, que elas possam nos trazer bons insights sobre o que fazer nesse momento. And I want to thank for your presence here, David, even though it's online. I hope you come to Brazil very soon. Also, Marcel, thank you for your time and for all of your insights. And thanks to everybody. Bye-bye.